Hello! Welcome to Prairie Conservation Action Plan's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Caitlin Rose, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan. Every month, PCAP asks someone to present either in the form of a webinar or an in-person talk in a Saskatchewan community on anything to do with native prairie conservation or species at risk. Stay tuned for upcoming Native Prairie Speaker Series webinars. On February 27th, Andrea Benville with Saskatchewan Ministry of the Environment will be talking about the Habitats program. That's the Hunting, Angling, and Biodiversity Information of Saskatchewan. On March 1st, Beatrice Prieto will be doing a talk in Mancota, Saskatchewan about the greater sage-grouse. More information about these presentations is available on the PCAP website. Just click Communications. PCAP is also hosting a Prairie's Got the Goods Week about the ecological goods and services provided by Native Prairie. This will be taking place March 12th to 18th, 2017. Check out our website for more information. Before we begin, I would just like to take a moment to note that in-kind support for this project has been given by the Royal Alberta Museum. This project was undertaken with the financial support of the Government of Canada and the Federal Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada. Now, a bit about our presenter. Corey Scobie is the Assistant Curator of Ornithology at the Royal Alberta Museum. He recently completed his PhD, which focused on the effects of human development on burrowing owl movement patterns and reproductive success in the grasslands of Alberta and Saskatchewan. He has worked with species at risk on the grasslands for the past 15 years, most of which has focused on mitigating potential negative impacts of industrial development. Corey loves nature and embraces any opportunity to share his passion with others. And now I will turn it over to Corey.
Hello, thank you very much, Caitlin. Today, I'm going to talk about my graduate work, where I looked at the relationship between burrowing owls and the landscape on which they lived, which is quite developed in Alberta and Saskatchewan. This work was done through the University of Alberta, but with the support from the Royal Alberta Museum, I'm able to be here today talking to you. Excuse me. Actually, before I go any further, I want to thank contributions from my two co-supervisors, Dr. Aaron Bain and Dr. Troy Wellicombe. First of all, I'll go into a little bit of natural history about the burrowing owl for those of you that aren't as familiar with them as I am. Burrowing owls are in Canada from April to October, where they where they come to breed. When they're not in Canada, they're in warmer climates. They go down to the southern United States and Mexico to overwinter. This is what a pair of burrowing owls typically look like on Alberta or Saskatchewan grassland landscape. The female is darker in color, so that's likely the female on the right-hand side and the male on the left-hand side. And this is the type of habitat in which we find them nesting, where we have short grass, and they're likely at a nest burrow. The burrowing owls that I studied nest in abandoned badger burrows. Most of the burrowing owls in Alberta and Saskatchewan nest in abandoned badger burrows. There's a small population in and around Grasslands National Park that rely on the burrows of black-tailed prairie dogs, but I didn't study those as part of my graduate work. This will become more important later on, but the female does all of the incubating and brooding, and so it's up to the male while the female is incubating and brooding the chicks to go out and hunt and bring food back for the female, and then he's provides most of the food after the eggs have hatched. And the chicks typically fledge in July. The things that burrowing owls eat, they eat a lot of deer mice, meadow voles, a lot of invertebrates. A lot of the prey that's brought back to the nest are invertebrates. They will also eat snakes and birds and kind of opportunistically amphibians and reptiles. But over 80% of the biomass they consume comes from the small mammals. And here in Canada, that's mostly from deer mice and meadow voles. The things that like to eat burrowing owls are great horned owls. This is a pair of young in a nest. Swainson's hawks and northern harriers. So these avian predators are responsible for the majority of the above ground mortality, and that means that most of the adults that are captured above ground, and when the chicks come above ground, these avian raptors are responsible for most of that mortality. The American badger, burrowing owls rely on badgers to dig burrows for them to nest in, but if a badger comes along while there's a nest in a burrow and he detects it, he'll go in and he'll eat all the eggs, chicks, and any adults that he can trap in there. So the American badger is responsible for most of the below ground mortality. This map shows the approximate current distribution of burrowing owls in Alberta and Saskatchewan, overlaid on satellite imagery. So it looks like quite a mosaic of landscapes there. And if we zoom in into Saskatchewan, we can see a quilt work of crop fields. Most of these are annual crop, and not a lot of grassland left, but we have quite a few burrowing owls nesting in this area. And if we zoom into Alberta, we can see that there's still quite a bit of open grassland. There is a bunch of agriculture. Most of the green, the dark green that you see, are agricultural irrigation pivots. And if we zoom in further into what looks like open grassland, we can see a little bit more of the other development that's on the landscape, and that's the oil and gas development. This is an area that is heavily developed by oil and gas, but it's also an area where there's consistently been burrowing owls nesting. So we do find them here, so what I wanted to find out is how well they're doing. And if we zoom into Saskatchewan, where there's quite a bit of agriculture, we can see that within that agricultural matrix there's still quite a bit of petroleum development. This is near Weyburn, and most of these wells are oil wells. So we have burrowing owls nesting on a diversity of landscapes surrounded by a variety of developments, and with this I'm able to look at where burrowing owls are choosing to nest and where they're doing best. Over the last 30 years, there's been an over doubling in the number of oil and gas wells that have been drilled within the burrowing owl range in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And at the same time, the burrowing owl range in Canada has continued to shrink. This figure shows the shrinking range of the burrowing owl, and the current distribution being the gray area with the crosshatches. And so it was this co-occurrence in time, the decline in the burrowing owl population, shrinking of the range, and increase in oil and gas development that led to the provinces and the federal government coming up with a matrix of setback distances and timing restrictions. So if a burrowing owl nest was discovered near a proposed development, the developer would have to adhere to these recommendations that they either construct outside of the breeding season or stay a certain distance away. And the thought was that if the development occurs further from the burrowing owl nest, that there would be less of an impact on that nesting attempt, and overall would have less of an effect on the population. But we find burrowing owls nesting on, like I said, a variety of landscapes. This is a burrowing owl nest that's in the middle of an active crop field. This is early in the season. And we also find burrowing owls nesting in landscapes that are quite heavily developed. This is a burrowing owl nest that was near a shallow gas well. So that's where I came in. So the development of the setback distances and timing restrictions was to try and reduce the impact of the perceived negative impact of human development on burrowing owls, particularly petroleum development. And so when I started on this project, I wanted to expand that and look at more the impact of all the developments that are on the landscape. So to do that, we needed to collect data on reproductive success of burrowing owls. And so when we found burrowing owl nests, we would find them either reported to us from landowners. We would do quite a number of surveys. They'd be reported to us from other biologists. And when we got permission from the landowner to visit the nest and to study them, we'd visit it once a week. And every time that we visit it, we would try and count the number of eggs, which would then give us an estimate of when the eggs would hatch, and then give us an idea of when the juveniles would fledge. And if we visit it once a week and the nest failed, we would then hopefully be able to see any signs that would give us an indication of what the cause of the nest failure was. So this is me at a burrowing owl nest. I think I'm holding a horned lark feather, and you can see part of a snake there on the mound and a number of pellets. But burrowing owls are difficult to study because their nests are underground. So to be able to see the nest inside the burrow, we used an infrared underground camera, and it's attached to a screen which is on a visor, and so I'm able to see what's on the end of the camera and put the camera into the burrow up to the nest so I can count the number of eggs or see the chicks and see how old they are. So this is me getting set up, and it being on the prairies, when you're looking at in a visor like this, it's quite difficult to see because there's quite a bit of glare from the sun. So the solution was putting a pillowcase over your head to reduce the glare. So this picture looks quite funny, but it's even funnier when you think of me being in the middle of a field with a pillowcase over my head right next to a busy highway. I can just imagine some of the thoughts that people had. So slowly put the camera in, and we get to the nest, and we can confirm that it's active, get an estimate of when the eggs are going to hatch and when the juveniles are going to fledge. And it's important to get an estimate of when the juveniles are going to fledge, which is approximately 30-35 days, because then we want to set up a camera at the nest. So this is one of our earlier setups. If you look at the far in the back in this picture, you can see a camera that's on a stake, and this is connected to a VCR and a battery, and so we can record the owls at this nest for a 24-hour period. So we leave this out in the field and then come back the next day and pick it up. And when there's burlap over it, you can hardly tell it's there. But you can see a little more clearly the camera in the back, which is pointed at the burrowing owl nest. So we record it for 24 hours, and then outside the field season, we hire a lucky technician to look through thousands of hours of videos, and they're able to get us a maximum number of juveniles that they observed during a 24-hour period. And that gives us a really good idea of the number of juveniles that then will fledge from that nest, which has been established in about 35 days. So with these data, I can answer a couple of questions. So the first one is I wanted to look at the choices that burrowing owls were making at the home range scale. So what landscape features do burrowing owls want around their nest? When they're arriving in the spring, April or even late March, and they're looking for a place to nest, what kind of features are they looking for to be near that nest that we think would, they'd want to minimize predators and they'd want to maximize the amount of food that's available to them. So to look at home range preference, I used arrival date to show preference, because the owls that arrive first from migration, those that are first on the landscape, have the first choice. And so they're able to then pick the best landscape, the landscape they perceive as being the best, which would have the most food and the least predators. And these features, an abundance of food and fewer predators, would likely be related to vegetation and other landscape features. So they're looking for cues on the landscape to indicate that this is a good place to nest because I don't have to worry about a whole bunch of predators, and there's lots of food. And so a number of studies have found on the grasslands that the highest abundance of small mammals are where there's lots of tall, dense vegetation, such as road ditches. This ditch would have quite a few small mammals, also crop fields. So I predicted that burrowing owls would want to have quite a few of these areas of tall, dense vegetation around their home range, and this would be a cue that they'd be looking for. And I also predicted that they would be avoiding areas that have trees, because in the trees like this one, there are stick nests, which can have an abundance of their predators, great horned owls, white-tailed hawks, virginous hawks will nest in these. And because burrowing owls are owls and they rely on their hearing while they're hunting, I thought they may try to avoid having really noisy industrial features such as compressor stations like is pictured here. They would avoid having those near their nests. And same with pump jacks, they produce sound and they're a visual disturbance. And busy roads. I thought that owls would probably choose to have fewer of these near their nest. And so I was able to draw on almost 900 nesting attempts. I started my graduate work in 2007, so I was able, and I'm quite grateful to be able to draw on reproductive success of owl nesting attempts that were collected before my graduate work. And so the nests you can see from this map are spread across the range in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And so the star in the middle is a burrowing owl nest, and the circle around it is a 1.4 kilometer radius. And this is what I used as the approximate home range of each owl. So I'll explain a little bit later about the tracking of owls that I did, but what I found was the average home range size for burrowing owls was equal to an area which is equal to a circle with a radius of 1.4 kilometers. So this is the average home range size of the burrowing owl. This is where they spend most of their time. So within this 1.4 kilometers, I thought that this would be an important area because that's the area that they would be looking for those landscape features, those cues, when they're choosing a place to nest. So within that circle, I looked at proportion of land cover, so native grass, tame grass, active crop field. I looked at amount of human development if there were farm yards. I looked at amount of road, all the variables that I could extract from here I did. And then I looked for patterns to see the earliest arriving owls, what were the types of features that they wanted to have within that 1.4 kilometers of their nest. And I was quite surprised to find that the model that came out on top. Now for anybody that's interested in more details and specifically the statistics that went into this, let me know. I'm happy to provide you with a copy of my thesis where I did go into those details. But the top model, which was the best predictor of arrival date, was the amount of crop and road within 1.4 kilometers. So the earliest arriving owls had the greatest amount of their home range covered by crop and road, which is interesting. It's kind of opposite what I thought. I thought it would be the tall, dense vegetation that owls would be looking for when choosing a place to nest. So these are the types of features that when they arrive in the spring, so the crops aren't growing yet, so it's a lot of bare soil, and road surfaces obviously are completely bare. It's these types of things that they wanted to have around their nests. So thinking about this a little bit more, and actually it was around this time, Alan Marsh, he did a companion study. We collected our data at the same time, and he found that burrowing owls were capturing prey where there was in areas that had lots of bare soil and had thinner, less dense, shorter vegetation. So, and what we think is happening is it's not necessarily the prey abundance that's important for burrowing owls, but it's prey availability. So there's lots of small mammals in the ditches, in the crop fields, but they're not available to the burrowing owls. They can't see them there and they can't capture them there. But it's this adjacent areas that have lots of bare soil or short vegetation, like road surfaces where if a mouse runs across this, an owl can see it and perhaps an owl can capture it. And same with crop fields. And typically you have an active crop field that has tall, dense vegetation, and so high prey abundance, adjacent to an idle field, which will have very short vegetation or lots of bare soil. And so the owls are able to capture the prey in the idle field. So these are likely the cues that owls are using. They want high prey availability around their nest. And if we think about the landscape in which burrowing owls evolved, this makes some sense. So the disturbances on the landscape prior to European settlement of the grasslands and conversion of the grasslands was fire and large herds of roaming bison. And so when you get fire go through an area, you then have short vegetation, and same when you get bison go through, you get bison wallows and you get lots of short vegetation. So otherwise, I think that the grasslands would have been relatively homogeneous until one of these disturbances came through. So these would be the cues that burrowing owls would have used when choosing a place to nest, where a fire went through recently or a large herd of bison went through recently, so that there's a higher prey availability. And so these same cues, the bare soil and short grass, that they're still using when they're choosing a place to nest. Okay, so we found where they're preferring to nest, landscapes are preferring to nest, but then that doesn't mean a lot until we then look to see if there's a relationship with their reproductive success. So where burrowing owls are preferring to nest with the short, with lots of bare soil in the spring, does that then affect their nest survival, adult survival, or fledging rate? Is there a positive effect? So they're choosing these areas that have lots of bare soil, and they have higher nest survival and higher fledging rate. So they're making good choices, or are they making poor choices and maybe stuck in an ecological trap? So they're preferring to nest in areas where they do poor reproductively. Well, when I looked at these relationships, and I found that burrowing owl nest preference, those features with lots of bare soil, that it didn't have a negative or positive effect on nest survival or adult survival. But when I looked at fledging rate, I found, again, an interesting trend that I wasn't expecting. I found that those owls that were choosing to nest in areas that have lots of the bare soil were actually then fledging more juveniles. So burrowing owls are making good choices at this scale. They're choosing to nest on landscapes where they do better reproductively. They fledge more young. The second scale that I looked at was within their home range. So burrowing owls arrive on the landscape, they pick a place to nest, then they're stuck to that location for the breeding season unless the nest fails. So within that home range, what kind of choices are they making? What landscape features do they use around their nest? And they're going to be looking for food primarily, but they're also going to be avoiding predators while they're doing this. So in order to track burrowing owls, I need to capture them. So this is me setting up a bow net trap, and don't ask me how or why this works, but I found the best combination of lures to be a decoy like I have there, a mounted burrowing owl. I have buried an electronic game caller there that's playing the burrowing owl primary call, and then on that dry cow patty I have a dead mouse tied to the trigger. So this worked the best. Burrowing owls, if I set this up near the nest or the roost, they would come in to see the intruder in their territory and try to defend it. And they would get close, but they'd get close enough to then see the mouse and be like, oh, food, and then go and pull the mouse and get caught in the trap. So it wasn't always easy, but this is interestingly the best setup. And obviously when I caught an owl, I was quite happy, despite I think there's 5 mosquitoes on my head. This was a particularly bad year for mosquitoes, but we did have pretty good success capturing owls. And once we captured them, we put a small GPS data logger on them. So the technology had just been made small enough so that we could put it on owls without having a huge impact on their behavior while they're wearing it. And it's put on with a backpack type configuration. And then we, once they're wearing the data logger, we put them back in their nest burrow. And so we release them in the nest burrow, and then we wait until the battery on the data logger has depleted, which is 10 to 11 days later, and then we try and catch the owl again. We take the data logger off, and then we plug it into a computer, we download the data, and this is what the data would look like. So this map shows burrowing owl locations and the nest. So the red star is the nest, and the yellow dots are the data logger locations. For my analysis, the data loggers were programmed to take a point every 15 minutes and to turn on right before dusk and then turn on just after dawn. Burrowing owls are crepuscular. Most of the food that they capture are during the twilight periods. Not so much in the middle of the night, but they're still doing some hunting there. So when you look at this, you can kind of start to see some patterns. If you look up in the top right-hand corner, there's kind of a cluster of points there, and it looks like the owl had flown back and forth there a few times. And if you look just by the scale bar, kind of just below the nest, you can see a cluster there. It had gone there a few times. And you can start to see some patterns, but we applied some stats to these data to get a quantitative idea of what is happening, and did a resource selection function. So I tracked 90 burrowing owls across their range in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And what I was really interested in is looking at the influence of artificial sound and light on their nighttime movement patterns. Because burrowing owls are an owl and they rely quite heavily on auditory and visual cues while hunting, that I thought that some of the larger industrial areas, such as compressor stations, would, and the artificial sound that they produce, would have a large impact on burrowing owls. I can hear, specifically from this compressor station, I can hear it 5 miles away. And I know burrowing owls have better hearing than I do, and so they would likely hear that from further away. And same with light. Artificial light and even different moon phases influences prey behavior quite a bit. So I thought artificial light would influence prey behavior and therefore also predator, the burrowing owl behavior. But I wanted to make sure that it was artificial light and sound that was influencing where owls are spending time, and not the human infrastructure that produces the artificial light and sound. So I developed some models and compared their effect on burrowing owl nighttime space use. So this is just to show some of the data that I used. This is a GIS layer that's freely available from NASA, and it shows the average stable lights on the landscape. So obviously the cities are brighter, and there's some other smaller rural communities. And you zoom in, this map shows, so the white triangles are burrowing owl nests. The different colored dots are different owls tracked over, some of them slightly different periods of time, and just shows where they're using on the landscape. But again, I wanted to compare where they're spending time to random location, do a resource selection function to see if they're avoiding or attracted areas that have artificial light. And this is what the sound data looked like. So I went to every compressor station and a number of oil wells and some busy roads, and I took sound measurements. I calculated sound power level, and then I modeled sound propagation and attenuation over the landscape, and calculated at each burrowing owl location and each random location that I used in my models the sound pressure level, so what the sound was actual at that point. And you can see that there's some areas that aren't very noisy that are blue in amongst a bunch of red, and that's because I also took into consideration the height at which the burrowing owls were flying and put my random locations at random heights as well. So there's some points that are right next to each other that are close to the ground, and so attenuation would be quite high, so the sound level there would be quite low. So these are my random and data logger locations and the sound pressure level at them, just to give an idea of what those data look like. And this is another map, and this owl just had the one compressor station and it wasn't quite as loud, so the landscape isn't impacted quite the same. So when I looked at the influence of sensory disturbance versus infrastructure on their movement patterns, I wanted to see which of these best explained where owls spent their time at night. So when I looked at the artificial sound and light models, it best explained where owls where owls spent their time for 27% of the owls. So 27% of the owls, their movement patterns at night were best predicted by artificial sound and light, but 50% were best predicted by infrastructure. The remaining 23% of the owls, their movement patterns at night were actually best explained by the null model, which means they weren't most influenced by either of these categories. So it's the infrastructure that's definitely having more of an impact on where they're spending their time at night. Okay, well, that's good news. It's not what I predicted, but that's definitely good news. And then we take it a step further and we look at individual owls. I found that about 50% of them were avoiding areas with high levels of artificial sound and light, and about 50% were attracted. And then when I look at the population level, and I use a generalized linear mixed model, there was no significant selecting for or against areas with high levels of artificial sound and light. So very interesting. Not what I predicted, but that's definitely good news. And when I look at their response to facilities and oil wells and paved roads, so in these models it was distance to these features, I found that about 70% of the owls were attracted to facilities, more than 80% were attracted to oil wells, and 50 to 80% were attracted to paved roads. So owls seem to be attracted to these features on the landscapes. Well, what's going on here? Well, it isn't that burrowing owls are actually perched on a moving pump jack, and they're not sitting on these extremely noisy compressor stations. What I think is happening is owls are spending time closer to these features because it's the associated landscape changes in infrastructure. So when they construct an oil well, there's also a gravel road that goes there, and so with gravel road you also have a ditch, and you also have the construction of fences and other perches. So it's these types of changes in the landscape and perching structures and stuff that I think that owls are attracted to. And again, it's important to then take the next step. So I looked at where owls are spending their time and what's more important predictor of their nighttime space use. And a really important one is roads, because there's always the potential for road kill. And so this figure on the x-axis shows hour, that's the time of night, so from 21, which is 9 o'clock, to 5, which is 5 a.m., and the proportion of their time that they spent on these roads. And so during right here in the middle of the night, from about midnight to 3 a.m., they're spending quite a bit of time on the roads. Up to a fifth of their time is actually perched on or very close to roads. So this could be definitely a conservation concern. But I also went out and I put traffic counters out on the roads near these burrowing owl nests, and I looked at the traffic volume. So on the x-axis again is time, but on the y-axis is traffic volume, vehicles per hour. And during that period of time when owls are spending most of their time on roads, traffic volume is at its lowest. So there's very low risk there for burrowing owls getting hit on roads. So when I actually do the analysis and I use the coefficients from the resource selection function to then see if there was a relationship between selection and their reproductive success. So are owls that are attracted to oil wells, are they doing poorly reproductively because they're not able to catch prey because it's noisy? Or so looking for those trends, because there's some that are attracted and some that are avoiding, are some making good choices and some bad choices. When I look for that relationship between resource selection and nest survival, I didn't find a relationship, nor did I find a relationship with fledging rate. So it seems that owls are able to do a good job. So they're nesting on a variety of landscapes, and they're doing a really good job of making a living on there. They're utilizing different structures and probably in different ways, but at the end of the day, their nest survival and fledging rate is about the same. One thing that I wasn't expecting to find, so in these resource selection functions, I need to put distance to nest as a covariate. And the reason I need to do that is because burrowing owls are what's called a central place forager. So they keep coming back to the same location. They keep coming back to the nest when they're delivering prey, or they're just hanging out there being vigilant for predators and stuff. but to adjust for the bias so that I need to put in distance to nest as a covariate. And when I looked at relationships between distance to nest and reproductive success, just for the heck of it, I found some really interesting patterns. I found that owls that spent more time near the nest burrow had greater nest survival. So this red line to the left of it, owls were avoiding or spending less time at the nest, versus to the right of that red line where they're spending more time, they're selecting for the nest. And so to the right of the line, where there's higher nest survival, as owls select for the burrow more, they select for the burrow more, they have greater daily nest survival. And the same thing, they fledged more young. As owls showed stronger selection for the nest burrow, they fledged more young. Again, not a result that I was expecting, and it's quite a strong trend. So trying to think about mechanisms why this makes sense. Well, during the twilight, so when they're really actively hunting, that's when they bring most of the prey back to the nest, there are, it's during this period of time they're bringing more prey back to the nest. Maybe they're showing selection for the nest during this period of time because they're actually bringing more prey back to the nest. So they're just at the nest more. It's not necessarily that they're hanging out there, it's just that they happen to be there more often, and so it shows selection for the nest burrow. So if they're making more prey deliveries, then we're going to have fewer nestlings die from starvation, which would explain higher nest survival and higher fledging rate. And I'm actually looking into this, so the chapter that's in my thesis, I'm adding to that now. I'm looking at prey delivery data to see if this prediction is supported. And in the middle of the night, when they're not doing so much hunting, but they're kind of loafing around and probably being vigilant for predators, if they are selecting for the nest burrow, then maybe they are spending more time at or very close to the nest, and they have greater predator vigilance. So they're close to the nest, they're able to detect and then communicate threats quicker to the female or the young, and they also then could have greater ability to repel predators, which again could explain the greater nest survival and fledging rate to those that are selecting for the nest. So in conclusion, owls are making good choices when they're deciding the landscape in which to nest, which is very good news. The choices that individuals are making when they're foraging at night, so where they're deciding to spend most of their time at night, results in similar reproductive success. So again, they're making good choices. They're definitely not making bad choices there. And the surprising result that owls that choose to stay near the nests during twilight and night have greater reproductive success. I want to thank the many field and lab assistants who helped with this project through the years, the many people that helped with logistical support. I want to thank the many land managers and landowners without whom we couldn't have done this work, and the many funding partners that provided support for this project. That's it.
Thank you very much, Corey. That was a really interesting talk. There are a couple questions that have been typed in throughout the presentation. If anyone in the audience has a question, you can just type that in. So the first question, is there a difference between public lands like PFRA pastures and private land in terms of viability for burrowing owls?
I didn't specifically, very good question. I didn't specifically look at burrowing owl preference for those different types of land or reproductive success. I would predict that there would be no difference. They're usually managed in quite a similar fashion. If we're comparing native private land to native PFRA pastures, I would say that they'd be very similar. It's more the vegetation and the management. Burrowing owls prefer shorter vegetation, but it's more the management rather than who the landowner is.
Okay, thank you. The next question, have changing cropping practices such as continuous cropping had an effect on nesting success?
Very good question. Again, not something specifically that I looked at, but one thing we did observe is that continuous cropping resulted in the retention of badger burrows on the landscape. So when they aren't tilled every spring, and a badger goes in and digs a burrow, then it'll be there for the next year and the next year. And so we did have some burrowing owls that were nesting in active crop fields, and usually when the landowner knew about it, they would go around it anyways. But I think overall, on a population and landscape level, that I would predict that change in practices actually results in greater burrow availability. We haven't found burrow availability being a limitation for the burrowing owl nesting locations, but I would say that it's if a burrowing owl is nesting in a crop field and they have a burrow there, landowner's not aware of it, but they're not tilling the next spring, then at least that burrow is available for that owl, especially if they had a successful reproductive event the previous summer. Then they can come back to that burrow and again have another successful breeding season.
Okay, the next question. Is there a correlation between badger and owl habitat preference?
That is a very, very good question. Unfortunately, very little work has been done on the badger, and I would propose to anybody that's out there and interested, it would be a great master's project, because the two species are so closely tied, and the burrowing owl is a declining endangered species. Understanding what's happening and habitat preferences of badgers, I think, is quite important. So, very good question. Unfortunately, I can't answer that. I know Joy Manella-Stevens looked at across the landscape kind of the overall habitat selection for burrowing owls, and found that climate and soil were the best predictors of where owls were found. And I'm wondering if perhaps there would be a similar trend for badgers, but I know there's different mechanisms and drivers there.
Okay, the next question is there any relationship between crop input date and fledging success?
Crop input date. So I'm guessing that this is when a crop is seeded.
Yes.
I don't know. One of the things that I'm actually I'm expanding on another one of my chapter theses that thesis chapters that looks at reproductive success, and I am trying to tease apart the influence of crop on their reproductive success, because if burrowing owls are choosing to nest in an area that has lots of bare soil, and that's mostly crop, so the owls are preferring to nest in areas that have lots of crop, are the owls that have more of that active crop in their nest that is then grown into active crop that year, do they do poorly? Does prey availability decrease as the season progresses because that crop is growing and the owls are no longer able to capture prey there? So I do have a subsample of my nest where I know within 1.4 kilometers what fields were idle and what fields were active in each year. And so I'm trying to see if, and then I'm looking at prey that's brought back to that nest, looking at video of prey deliveries to see if in some of those areas where there's more active crop versus idle field, if the prey that's brought back to the nest decreases. So I may be able to get a better sense of how at least prey availability decreases throughout the season, which could potentially be a result of crops growing. But when a particular crop is put in the field, burrowing owls, so that's burrowing owls have nested successfully in a crop field. That's answering it from that perspective. The other perspective is when burrowing owls choose to nest on the land, they typically initiate their nest in April, and I believe that's before most crops are seeded. So the burrowing owls are already there. So if you then go and see, there is the potential to have a negative impact on that nest if it's run over or something, but the specific timing of that wouldn't really matter. I guess the earlier it happened, if there was a negative impact on that nesting attempt, they'd have more time to potentially re-nest if it's still early enough. But I hope that answered your question.
Yes, I think so. The next one that was put in here, would the ability to stay close to the nest at night be tied to prey numbers?
That's another very good question. So there's just selecting for the nest because they don't have to go very far because there's lots of food. And again, I should be able to tease that out looking at the prey delivery data that I have to see. Yeah, I guess I won't know if they're just, no, I should, because there were cameras set up at the nest that were recording prey deliveries, and we had data loggers on the owls. So I will be able to tell if those owls are delivering lots of prey but still going far from the nest, or if they're delivering lots of prey and staying close to the nest. So I should be able to tease that apart. That's a good point, and I'll make sure that I have a chance to look at that.
Thanks, Corey. The next question is, it was typed in that the participant is interested in the infrared goggles used to view, oh, sorry, things are just moving here on me. Where did we go?
Oh, the camera and the visor that we use to see inside the burrow?
And so they're wondering what suppliers are available in Canada and what is the approximate cost?
Actually, I was quite lucky because Dr. Troy Wellicombe, my co-supervisor, was quite handy with that, and he actually made, so he took a infrared security camera and connected it to a hose and put it together, and then we just connected it to a 12-volt battery, and the visor we had an input for 12 volts, so we were just able to plug them together. The different components, I don't know how much they cost. There is a commercial version available, but the hose isn't as rigid, which is essential for this, and so it wasn't as useful for us. And I believe it was called a sandpiper. But if you're interested in the version that Troy made, you might want to get in touch with him. He's with Canadian Wildlife Service. That's Troy Wellicombe.
Okay, wow. There's a question here. Are you aware of any adaptive management in different levels of government or other organizations that is being pursued based on your thesis results?
Very, very good question. I know that there was interest in it. I would need to go back. I know I've been contacted with from several people that were interested in my results and requested copies of my thesis. Active incorporation of my results into the management, I'm not sure if they've actually been put into practice, but I know that it's being considered.
Oh, great. Okay, the next question. It seems there's a positive effect of oil and gas facilities and well sites on the burrowing owl in that they are creating a nesting habitat. But are you seeing any negative effects of these areas on the burrowing owl?
Well, I didn't see any positive effects on nesting habitat per se. Like there was nothing. I didn't find any negative effects on proximity of the nest or number of compressor stations around a nest. I didn't find any negative impacts, and actually we did, me and a number of other authors, Ryan Fisher and Troy Wellicombe, Aaron Bain, and Alan Marsh, we put together a report. It's Influence of Petroleum Development on Burrowing Owls, and it's freely available. If you Google that, you'll definitely find a copy of it. And we did a report where we looked at the influence of kind of every aspect of petroleum development and different petroleum features and combinations thereof that we could think of to see if there was a negative impact on burrowing owl nest survival and fledging rate and adult survival, and we didn't find any negative effects. There was nothing strong that was going on. If anything, we found some evidence, a little weak, but we did find evidence of some positive influence, particularly of shallow gas wells on burrowing owls.
Okay, thank you, Corey. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type that in. I'll just ask everyone to, at the end of this presentation, you'll receive a questionnaire. It's just a quick 1-minute questionnaire, so if you don't mind taking a couple minutes to answer that, we would really appreciate it. If there aren't any more questions, then I guess I'll just thank you very much, Corey, and if anyone does have any further questions for Corey, you're welcome to send him an email. This presentation will also be uploaded to the PCAP YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/user/skpcap. And you're welcome to pass the link on to anyone who missed the presentation today, or if you end up joining late, you'll be able to watch it on YouTube later. So thank you very much, Corey, and thank you everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.